Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is a Neihart webinar. We'll be discussing 401ks are not free, the real cost of your 401k plan with benefit consultant Mike Kiley. Today's conversation will last 30 minutes in length. It should be finishing right at 11:30. For those who have a bit more time, if you're interested in staying on the line for a Q&A session, you're more than welcome to. We actually have until noon for Q&A if appropriate. Mike Kiley is one of our lead benefit consultant advisors here at Neihart, and we are very proud to have him present today's topic. If you have questions throughout today's presentation, feel free to just interrupt, take off your mute, and drop out the question. If it's a question that requires a bit more detail of a response, we may hold that till the end. Otherwise, we will have that Q&A at the last portion of today's program. Again, if everyone could please remember to put your phone on mute, that'd be fantastic. Definitely convenient for everyone else. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Kiley. Mike.
Thank you, James. Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for the time and your time this morning. And I hope everybody's having a good morning this morning. But the topic today is a timely one, I think, when it comes down to it, because there's a lot of things going on in the 401k industry when it comes to fees. And I think that in talking about this is important because we know a lot of plan sponsors are probably in the near future, or if not already, going to be going through and doing some due diligence on their plans to take a look at what are the fees we're paying right now. But also, too, there might be some other vendors or other plan sponsors who might be really looking to do more of the full expansive, what's called an RFP process, request for proposal, where they might be looking at a number of different vendors. And that really is a challenge today because there are a number of different vendors out there that really they charge fees in a different manner. And so the hope of today and the goal of today is to try to explain and really give you a good idea of where those different fees come from, so you can be armed and equipped when you're taking a look at your plan or again doing this RFP process, knowing where some of those fees come from. And I think in looking at the agenda for today, first and foremost, why is it important? Why is it knowing that the plan's 401k fees, why is that important to us? And secondly, really who are the players and the associated fees that they might charge in a 401k plan? And I think that's probably more important discussion because, again, we want to equip you with knowing where a lot of these fees are going to be coming from. And then thirdly, what is that quote-unquote shell game that kind of goes on? And I use shell game in kind of air quotes because I think really what we're referring to there is where can I look to find the fees that really might not be as evident to me when I'm looking at my plan, trying to get a full picture of the fees that are charged to our 401k plan. And then following up, we'll talk about action items and possible solutions for really I think give you some perspective on what we're seeing plan sponsors do in relation to a lot of questions and unclarity that they have when it comes to 401k fees. And then finally, what is on the horizon? What's coming up in the near future with respect to fees? I think really whenever you, if anybody were ever to go to a conference or if you're ever to go to sit through any kind of discussion on a national scale about 401k plans, probably the number one topic that's going to be talked about are fees, because there are regulatory requirements coming up in the near future with respect to fees, and we'll touch on that just briefly. But first of all, why is it important? Why is it important to know about the 401k fees in my plan? And I think first and foremost, for plan sponsors, not only is it important just to know what you're being charged, but also it is your fiduciary duty to make sure that the fees you're charged are reasonable for the participants in your plan. And then secondly, obviously for plan participants, excessive fees can rob you, obviously, of your retirement savings. And there are a number of statistics out there that clearly show that the effects of excessive fees would have on participants' accounts on a going-forward basis. When you take into consideration, for example, a 25, 30, 35-year-old person who might get charged, for example, an extra 0.5% or maybe even more on his account on a going-forward basis each year, that easily can amount to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars on a going-forward basis. But also, and one thing we talk about a lot in education meetings with participants is that a benefit that participants have to their advantage is the fact that there's a compounding, snowballing effect of their account balance as time goes on with those reinvested dividends, what have you. You don't want to have excessive fees being robbing you of those of that snowballing, compounding effect on your account balance. Another point to make too is that plan sponsors have a fiduciary responsibility to look out for the best interest of their participants when it comes to fees, but a lot of times the plan sponsors themselves, the folks that are kind of the reps and the fiduciaries on the plan, they're also participants in the plans themselves. So not only do they have an interest to look out for the best interest of the participants, but they also have their own vested interest as well to make sure the fees that are being charged at their accounts are reasonable also. So let's get into talk about who the players are in the 401k and a typical 401k plan, really trying to give you a good idea of really who all the different players are that could be in any 401k plan out there. I know that again, different vendors do things differently, but I think that again there could be just a number of these different players that might apply to your plan. But at least I want to be able to shed some light on the different people that might be involved on your plan today. First and foremost, we talk about the investment advisor fees. The investment advisor is that rep that is going to, number one, look through the initial and prepare the initial fund lineup that the participants would be able to choose on a going forward basis. They would also, on a going forward basis, monitor those investments to make sure that the plan always has sufficient investment options that are appropriate for the plan and for the participants in the plan. And they would do that according to the plan's investment policy statement. Now, typically, investment advisors, the way that they charge their fees are generally on a percentage of total plan asset basis or perhaps even on a flat dollar basis. What you might see, for example, you have a $5 million plan, and in terms of total plan assets, an investment advisor might quote for example, 25 basis point charge on total plan assets, and that's what their fee would be to do the things that they need to do to service the plan that they need to service it by. And 25 basis points, what I mean by that is 0.25%. But that's pretty standard, I think, for a investment advisor fee. Now, obviously, I'm quoting 0.25%. That could be more or less depending on the size of the plan, the amount of services, obviously. But that's very typical in the 401k industry. But also, too, they might even equate that down. We're seeing this a little bit more and more to more of a flat dollar fee that the investment advisor might charge instead of a percentage of assets. Now, I know going back to 2008, 2009, I think investment advisors who were already doing a flat dollar basis probably reap the benefits of that, because obviously an investment advisor charging a percentage of asset fee, they're going to get a little bit of a price reduction, a fee reduction because of the asset value drop. But bottom line, that's essentially how investment advisor and their fees work. Now, also another component is record keeping administration. And obviously the record keeper, they're going to do that participant level accounting on behalf of the plan. So for example, if there are 50 people in the plan, then the record keeper is going to know participant 1, participant 2, participant 3, what their account balance is, broken out by fund, broken out by different money sources, 401k match, rollover, et cetera, et cetera. And they're also going to do those other functions too administratively for preparing 5500, discrimination testing, those types of things. So they're going to handle those administrative types of functions, but they typically charge their fee on more of a flat dollar, and what we see a lot of times is more on a per participant basis, and a little more on the rare side is on an asset-based fees where you see those record-keeping admin charges. But typically you will see flat dollar per participant fees.
Everyone make sure they have their mute on their phone so we don't have any background noise during the remainder of the presentation. Thank you.
And moving on and talking about probably a more important part of the expenses, I think that number one typically is the highest plan expense, and we're looking at total plan expense, but oftentimes it is the most overlooked plan expense when plan sponsors are trying to do the due diligence to figure out how much you're actually paying for their plan. Mutual fund expense ratios. Now really any mutual fund in a 401k plan, they're going to have an investment expense or expense ratio, and the breakout of that typically is the largest percentage usually goes to the actual fund manager themselves. That's the fee that they would charge for the investment management and the buying and selling of the individual securities and what have you, but that's their fee. That's usually the largest component of that expense ratio. Other components that typically come into play are, as mentioned, broker fees and commissions. That is a fee that's paid to a broker on the case, as opposed to, as we mentioned before, investment advisors. But that broker fee, they would collect, and it's often termed the 12B1 commission or finder's fees, what have you. But they, brokers, true brokers, receive that compensation directly from the mutual fund expense ratios, and again, it's classified as commissions. Other compensation typically built in expense ratios, and this term revenue sharing, which we'll touch on here in just a little bit, but that typically is also built into mutual fund expense ratios as well. And again, the point being, the final point, that typically this is the highest plan expense, and we'll touch on that here in just a little bit as well. Other fees that come into play are, especially when you're dealing with an independent record keeper TPA, a lot of times they would trade through a custodian, and the custodian for the plan would actually be the one that would hold the investments, the total plan assets for the plans would be held in a trust account, or, for example, a bank might actually be a custodian for the plan. But they typically would be the ones, again, that would hold the plan assets. They would process trades on an ongoing basis when contributions come in or distributions go out of the plan. So they would handle a lot of that day-to-day activity behind the scenes. And typically they would charge an asset-based fee for what they do. A typical fee for a custodian might be somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 10 basis points, which is 0.05% or 0.1%. That's a very standard fee for a custodian. You know, sometimes they might add on a additional flat base fee as well to that, but that's typically what you would see for a custodian fee. And also they have nominal fees, transactional fees for cutting checks, distributions, 1099s, etc. If there is also a trustee on the plan, the way I break it down is that really, when it comes to a trustee, there's two options. Number one, the plan sponsor themselves. There might be individuals there named trustee at the actual corporation, or there can be more of a corporate or directed trustee, where an actual, for example, trust company or a bank might be named a trustee on the plan. If that is the case, a lot of times there are going to be additional fees that are going to come into play for that component too, in addition to the custodian fees. A typical fee in this arena might be in the ballpark of $1,000 to maybe $2,000 annually. And again, that would be a typical fee. Obviously, that could be less or more depending on the size of the plan and the amount of services, but that's a very standard fee for the additional trustee services if there is a directed or corporate trustee named on the plan. Okay. Okay, and also too, when it comes to insurance company products, there's a lot of confusion about this. The one thing I want to be able to point out is that typically the way insurance companies approach their fees is that they will wrap in a lot of additional expense for other things such as administration, for example, mortality and expense fees, contract asset charges, what they might be labeled as, but additional fees typically are layered and built within the mutual fund expense ratios of the funds. So a lot of times what you will see is when you look at the individual funds within a group annuity contract for an insurance company product, you will see a certain mutual fund. But if you were to take that mutual fund and the actual expenses being charged within that group annuity contract and compare that fee with the actual fee of the actual mutual fund, and using, for example, Morningstar or actually the fund's prospectus, that difference there you'll see would be really the true additional costs that would be added on and layered on that would be essentially paid to the insurance company for their administration, their services for the plan. So be aware of that, because that is very much behind the scenes of that a lot of plan sponsors don't know about, but it is there. And also we mentioned sub-advisory fees as well. That is a fee that's actually paid to an outside investment manager to oversee and manage the investments that are offered. And in addition, that will be a fee in addition to what the plan's investment rep would charge as well. And other fees too, annual audit fees. If the plan has over 100 participants, there's an annual audit that comes into play, which the auditor would charge a fee for that. And then there's also too legal fees for example, a law firm to prepare plan documents, amendments, summary plan descriptions, etc., etc. Now, when it comes to the breakdown of cost, the one thing I want to point out with this graphic scenario is the fact that when you're looking at all the fees and really trying to allocate what really represents the biggest chunk of fees when looking at total plan cost, the largest percentage usually would come from the investment side of things, the investment expense. Again, when you look at it, when you ask a plan sponsor what they're paying for a plan, a lot of times what they equate is how much am I writing a check for, how much do I see come across my desk. A lot of times they don't see that investment cost that's behind the scene, the investment expense ratios. But again, as this graphic scenario points out, a vast majority of the total plan fees come from those investment expenses, and they need to be considered when you're looking at total plan cost. And a smaller percentage would come from record keeping and trustee fees. And in this scenario, we used a source called 401k Averages book, and for 100 participants and $5 million, using those demographics, that is how this breakdown of cost works. And based on those demographics, they came up with a less than 6% of the total plan cost would come from record keeping and trustee fees. And what is, and still using that same, the same source, 401k Averages book, 10th edition, and what is the average total plan cost per year per person? It comes out to $670 per year is what they're showing as a basically total plan cost for, again, using a demographics of 100 participant plan and $5 million in total plan assets. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that when you're looking at, especially doing an RFP process, we're looking at different vendors. It is a tough challenge to be able to look at, how can I do more of an apples-to-apples comparison between these different vendors and try to equate and really have a level playing field with this. It is, again, different vendors do use different approaches to charging fees, and it is often tough to do an apples-to-apples comparison, as it says up there, because, again, different vendors actually do approach how they charge fees much differently. So what is as I call it, the shell game, air quotes around that, but I think what it comes down to, the way that I explain it, is more of the explicit versus implicit fees. And what I mean by explicit fees are the plan sponsor is invoiced directly for the applicable fee that we're talking about. It's very clean, it's very easy to disclose, it's very easy to identify, again, because it is a direct fee that the plan sponsor is being charged. So those are, when it comes to fee disclosure and understanding fees, I think there's much less confusion when it comes to this aspect. Where the confusion comes into play is more of the what's called implicit fees, where fees are more deducted automatically from the plan, or they're paid or offset by other compensation. Again, it is a source of much confusion, and I think that is where we really try to focus a lot of our attention on for this purpose here. Now, when talking about implicit fees, now this whole concept of revenue sharing, I think, comes into play, which I know that some of you might have heard the term revenue sharing, but I think that's where, again, a source of a lot of confusion comes into play for that. What is revenue sharing, essentially? Well, it is compensation. That we talked about before, the investment, the mutual fund expense ratios. Well, a portion of that for a lot of funds out there is this revenue sharing portion of that. And again, what is revenue sharing? It's compensation paid directly from mutual fund companies to the service providers, and typically the service providers being record keepers, brokers. Now again, it's paid directly to them, so the plan sponsor does not see this compensation, and therein lies the rub. Now, what will also, you might hear the terms sub-TA fees, 12B1 fees I mentioned before, shareholder service fees, but really we're talking about revenue sharing with that. And for revenue sharing, it is going to vary by mutual fund and by share class. Not all mutual funds out there have revenue sharing attached to them. And even more specifically, for an individual fund, there could be a number of different share classes that have varying levels of revenue sharing by those different share classes of that individual mutual fund. So you need to be aware of that also. The main question to consider with revenue sharing is, how is it applied? And is it used as revenue sharing that's paid from the mutual fund companies? Is it used to reduce ongoing administrative charges, or is it essentially kept and retained by the plan's vendor, the plan service provider? That's a big piece that needs to be uncovered, because we're talking about revenue sharing. That's kind of where the shell game comes into play a lot of times, and it needs to be, again, discovered, needs to be disclosed, but also, again, the big question is, how are they using that? And also getting on to talking more about what's called bundle providers. And I think what we mean by bundle providers are those groups out there that actually can be able to provide multiple services for a 401k plan. So the very simple example, let's say you have ABC Investment Advisory Firm is a registered investment advisor, and they also provide record-keeping services on behalf of the plan. So if they quote a fee for their advisory services that are more than enough to cover the administration of the plan, then they could even be able to come in and say, well, we'll do free administration on your plan, and we'll charge you X, whatever that might be, for investment advisory services. A more common example out there is ABC Mutual Fund Company also provides record-keeping services, but also they might have investment advisors on staff as well. Now, the flow coming into ABC Mutual Funds essentially is revenue to the company. So as long as there's a required number of those ABC Mutual Fund investment options available in the plan, then they can offer a reduced cost on the administrative and record-keeping side. That's a very typical thing that's going on today. But one thing to be aware of is the fact that there are some investment limitations, obviously, when the investment advisor only has a certain cross-section of investments to choose from within that certain mutual fund family. So sometimes the flexibility goes away a little bit. And also, too, you need to be aware of restrictions. If the vendor in question, if they are only providing certain types of services, and there's not a lot of flexibility with that, and there are some limitations or constraints on what the services that are being provided by the service provider, then they can offer obviously reduced fees for that. And we often refer to this as the box, air quotes around that. If the plan is able to fit into this box that the service provider is able to provide for them, then obviously the reduced fees could apply. But bottom line is the old adage, you get what you pay for. So additional fees to be aware of as well, insurance contract fees, we talked about that a little bit more, sub-advisory fees, we mentioned that also. And I think, again, that is something to really be to consider when you're looking at all the fees, because, again, it's going to be very much behind the scenes. It's going to be wrapped in the individual mutual fund expense ratios. So a lot of times, again, the plan sponsor does not see that, they don't understand that, and they can't put their hands around it. But those do need to be considered when you're looking at all fees in terms of what are those insurance contract fees. Now, those fees are in the actual contract itself. It might be buried a little bit, but it's a good thing to hire out a consultant and have them look through that contract to be able to uncover what those fees actually are. Now we start talking about possible action items and solutions. And again, just really trying to give some perspective to what we're seeing a lot of other plan sponsors do as well. First and foremost, obviously know all fees. And I think it's one thing to ask a question of your vendor to say, well, what are you charging for our plan? Because you might only get half the story with that. But I think it's important to request an all-in fee disclosure from your current vendor. When we say all-in, what we mean is all fees. We talked about mutual fund expense ratios. We talked about record-keeping administration charges, investment advisory fees, et cetera, et cetera. All-in fees, those all need to be discovered, and your current vendor needs to disclose those. And also on a going forward basis, demand ongoing disclosure of all fees. Now things could change over time. For example, there could be changes in the investments within the plan that would bring about different investment mutual fund expense ratios and revenue sharing. There could be demographic changes within the company. So demand ongoing disclosure of all these fees to make sure that you're aware of all the fees that are being charged. And also to request a benchmark of your total fees. It's one thing to know how much, the first step is knowing how much is being charged, but the second step is, okay, is that amount that's being charged, is that reasonable? I think that's a $100 question. There are a number of services and providers coming out now with benchmarking studies and surveys and services that they could be able to offer plan sponsors to help out to benchmark the fees that are being charged on your plan. Is it too high? Is it just right? Are you getting actually a pretty good deal with the plan you have right now because you're being charged a very reasonable low rate? But again, that's something that needs to be covered as well. And also, too, what we're seeing a lot of is that some plan sponsors are going to what's called more of a no-load or passive investment style. What we mean by that is that plan sponsors are moving to mutual funds and or share classes that really strip out a lot of that revenue sharing. We're seeing this from a lot of more seasoned 401k investment advisors to where, and that really makes the whole fee discussion very clean and very straightforward, because obviously in that situation there's none of this compensation going on behind the scenes that plan sponsors don't know about. And really revenue sharing, I think, for a lot of clients is a tough thing to get their arms around. So again, what we're seeing a lot of investment advisors do, strip out a lot of that revenue sharing, really go into more of those mutual funds or share classes that really don't have this revenue sharing accounted for. And also, the one thing to take into consideration as well is that when you do go to this investment style that strips out a lot of this extra revenue that's built within the mutual fund expenses, the obvious comes out to be is that it dramatically lowers the investment expenses that are charged to the participants. Now, I think it also, we talk about the passive investment style, because investment managers will charge a certain fee for actively managing a certain investment. But if there's more of a passive investment style or index investing or what have you, then that's where you can really dramatically lower the investment expenses that are charged to participants. And I think ultimately what the goal is to have fees become more clear, and which is the main reason why plan sponsors go to this no load, again, or passive investment style, is because they want to understand their fees, they want to see their fees, they want to get a better grasp on it. So the fees do become explicit instead of being implicit behind the scenes, and I think that's really what plan sponsors really respect and appreciate. So what's on the horizon when it comes to fees? And really, when it comes down to it, fees are currently being disclosed on the Form 5500 Schedule C, and that started up with the 2009 Form 5500 Schedule C. So you're seeing a lot of this plan level fee disclosure already happening. Although one thing to be aware of is that when looking at these dollars and these amounts on the 5500 Schedule C, it is not an all-in fee disclosure. So be aware that when you see these numbers, that's not really the true cost. Again, I think the idea is to go back to your plan vendor and make sure that you are getting more of an all-in fee disclosure, which incorporates in, again, mutual fund expenses, other service fees, record-keeping administration, what have you. And also, beginning April of 2012, which this used to be January of 2012, but we just got word yesterday that they pushed back this date on these fee disclosure regulations will become effective. But beginning April of 2012, essentially, fee disclosure will be required for all vendors to plan sponsors. And as part of this regulation 408B2, which, again, if you go to any conference on 401k plans right now, 408B2 fee disclosure would be something that would be very high up on the agenda to discuss. And also to participant level fee disclosures will be coming as well, in addition to more of the plan sponsor level disclosures that the vendors are doing to plan sponsors. Again, participant level fee disclosures also will be coming as well. So really, again, it's a very hot topic. It is very pertinent, and it's been talked about and discussed for a number of years, but it is coming down the pike, coming up in 2012.
All right, with that, Mike, thank you for today's discussion. I'd like to leave it open to participants on the call. If you have any specific questions you would like to ask Mike in this public forum, please do so. Otherwise, we'll wrap up here shortly. Okay, no public questions, that's fine. We'll be appreciating everyone's time today. One note I do want to make sure everyone's aware of is this discussion Mike had at the very about 408B2 regulations. We're going to be hosting another 30-minute webinar in 2 weeks with fiduciary consultant Eric Roberts discussing the impact of new 408B2 regulations and what that will mean for your specific plan's disclosures. If you have any questions, let us know. Otherwise, you can register for that event at nyhart.com/events. Thanks everyone for your time today.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Nice job, Michael.
30 minutes.
You know, as I sat there and watched it, something that might be kind of interesting. Yeah, did you know you're being recorded? You can shut that off. You're in the background. It's being recorded.